local communities, biodiversity, and the climate. The idea is that so-called solutions to the biodiversity and climate crises are being developed not for the protection of biological diversity, but to ensure the unsustainable continuation of business as usual. And we have a press release that we will release after this is over. If people would like it, it has many more resources that people can look into. Please let me know. I would be happy to send it to you. So I'm going to introduce first Suparna Lahiri, the Climate and Biodiversity Policy Advisor from Global Forest Coalition, who will give a big picture of what we're talking about here.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us in the press conference. We don't have to look far beyond. As you walk down the corridor here, you can see posters saying biodiversity positive by 2030, and you go into the hall corridors of negotiations, and just now you are hearing that 30 by 30 terms like 30 by 30, biodiversity positive, nature-based solutions, net gain, net improvement, no net loss. These are the terms that we see being flooded, in the GBF text. And what do they actually mean to us? If you really want to conserve, protect, and restore biodiversity, and we have a milestone here that we need to halt and reverse biodiversity loss by 2030. The thing that we immediately want and should do is really to halt and reverse biodiversity loss. And when you say 30 by 30, what is the basis of coming up to this numerical number 30 by 30, 30% by 2030? Is it that only you are trying to numerically expand the protected areas without seeing that what is the existing, nature of the protected areas, how protected areas have been notified from the colonial times to the post-colonial countries, how the state has been managing the protected areas with a lot of violence, dispossession of the communities. The history is not here, actually. It only talks of how to increase those number of protected areas, which are actually paper protected areas. How much of biodiversity these protected areas have been able to conserve over the years, and over the blood and disposition of the communities who have been really conserving the biodiversity of in those areas. And you don't even consider that there are many areas which are literally being traditionally conserved by the communities, and you don't want to recognize them. Now, what is happening is that, and what we are seeing unfolding is the protected areas becoming the biodiversity offsets. And I tell you how. Because any company can mine somewhere else 200 square kilometers and then invest in saying that you protect 200 square kilometers and make it a national park. So that's your no net loss of biodiversity. And if you can make it 300 square kilometers, you are biodiversity positive. That is what they mean when they say biodiversity positive by 2030. So the biodiversity loss is continuing, and you are putting figment of those imaginative, kind of situation where these false solutions in the name of nature-based solutions, biodiversity positive, no net loss, are continuing. Nature-based solutions, it is creaming up again and again in a lot of those targets. We don't even know what are these nature-based solutions. CBD COP decisions have never included in the text NBS. We know ecosystems approach. We know of the principles by which the ecosystems approach are defined within the CBD text. I was looking into a shell document of a study that they are making, global study. First paragraph itself says these are nature-based solutions project, and in this project, we want high integrity carbon credits. So what does that mean? In the veil of nature-based solutions, they are pushing the same false solutions of carbon credits, offsets, biocredits, whatnot, monoculture plantations, that doesn't solve the crisis that we are in. We simply understand that both from the climate point of view and the biodiversity loss point of view, you have a milestone in front of you that is 2030. And IPCC says that you have to halve your reduction by 2030. And to halt and reverse biodiversity, you have to do that by 2030. Any other solution that doesn't address this is a false solution. And you cannot just peddle it to continue business as usual within the framework of global biodiversity framework, upon which so many people across the world, we all are looking forward that there has to be some kind of an agreement to immediately attend to the crisis that we are in. But if that doesn't happen, I think these false solutions are creating barriers to move forward with real solutions towards both addressing the climate change crisis and the biodiversity loss crisis. A GBF cannot support this.
Thank you very much, Suparna. We had also invited Survival International to be a part of this press conference. Unfortunately, they are not here, but they did put out a very important statement prior to this event, and I'm going to read a summary of that statement as part of this press conference. Survival International released a joint statement calling on states at COP15 to urgently reconsider their pledge to declare 30% of the planet as protected areas. Without a serious overhaul, the so-called 30 by 30 target will devastate the lives of indigenous peoples and will be hugely destructive of the livelihoods of other subsistence land users while diverting attention away from the real drivers of biodiversity and climate collapse. 250 indigenous organizations, NGOs, and academics have come together to express concern over the proposed doubling of protected areas under the UN post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Protected areas, which are the cornerstone of mainstream Western-led conservation efforts, have led to widespread evictions, hunger, ill health, and human rights violations, including killings, rapes, and torture across Africa and Asia. Many have subsequently expressed their concerns about the human cost of 30 by 30 and how expanding the protected area network could lead to many more human rights violations and other negative impacts on millions of people who are the least responsible for the biodiversity and climate crises. Given that 80% of the world's biodiversity is found on indigenous peoples' lands, the evidence is clear. The best way to conserve ecosystems is to protect the rights of those who live in and depend on them. Thank you. We will have the full statement available in our press release. And next, I would like to introduce Tom Wakeford, who is the Europe coordinator for the ETC group, who is going to talk about the other kinds of extreme technologies, such as biotechnology, that are being promoted as false solutions to the biodiversity crisis. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. So an alternative title for this press conference could have been Billionaires, blah, blah, blah. And just to build on what Suparna and Anne have said, it really is just a handful of billionaires that are engaging in these extreme solutions, these false techno fixes. People like Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk. We hear a rumor that this whole event could be turned on its head in a few days by a big announcement from Jeff Bezos. They're just completely unaccountable people. Some of whom seem to think that the Earth should become a nature reserve while others go off to Mars. And that's not a joke. The thing I want to highlight today is Earth systems engineering. So Suparna covered one perspective on it, which is what it looks like on the ground. What it looks like for an engineer is that you are just treating the planet as a machine and you're tweaking it with your billionaire bosses to make as much money as possible. And then you can go off to your planet B. Geoengineering is a major part of this, and that touches on what Suparna said. We have people in the room who can brief you more on that if you're interested, these ways of supposedly and tweaking the climate in various ways. But I want to focus on biotechnology today because synthetic biology is a UN term, but what most of you know it as is genetically modified organisms, new GM, what's been used a lot over the years and is coming back with a vengeance now is climate smart agriculture. This idea that if you just ignore the knowledge of indigenous peoples and local communities and you leave it to billionaires and scientist dependence, that you can just engineer your way out of the real challenges people face accessing to water, where you develop something supposedly drought resistant, not got enough land, well, you just grow things in ever more intensive ways and don't think about what you're doing to rivers and soils and things like that. Kenya is an example just in the last couple of weeks. In fact, you can see the video just launched this morning on Etc. Group's Twitter account and other social media. Bill Gates visited a month or so ago, and lo and behold, he committed 7 billion to Africa for these high-tech approaches to agriculture. And a few days later, one of the East African governments agreed to 10 million bags of GM maize being dumped to supposedly deal with hunger. Now, these technologies, 20 years we've had genetically engineered crops. They weren't subject to a proper form of technology assessment. There wasn't sort of anticipatory work, what here we call horizon scanning, to see what was coming down the line. They just arrived in the control of companies like Monsanto, now Bayer, and the result, we all know, has been environmental devastation, human health impacts, and biodiversity collapse. But I'm afraid there's even worse up their sleeve. The Gates Foundation is among the biggest funders, along with the US Defense Research Agency, of gene drive organisms. So that's something that the CBD has a partial moratorium on at the moment. But if they are released, their effect is the genetic equivalent of a nuclear chain reaction, because they corrupt the normal 50-50 process of sexual reproduction, and instead of 50-50, 50-50, the proportion of the desired gene does that in the population till it reaches 100%. It's aimed to wipe out species. Its main application will be agriculture, although many of Gates's projects are saying, oh, it'll stop malaria, it'll do sorts of other things. So what actually that could do in an agricultural setting, you wipe out one insect species. We all know about genetic transfer between closely related species. There's a chain between species. You could be, in principle, without pollinators. Who's scanning the horizon for what could be coming down the line with GM viruses? In terms of gene drive organisms, the concept seems to have been proven in the lab in places like Imperial College, and they are desperate to get permission to release it. There's releases already going on in Burkina Faso, and our colleague Gali Tapsoba will be arriving later today and can talk to you about that from his base in Burkina Faso. So just finally, to do technology assessment, it should include indigenous people and local communities, their perspectives, their lived experience, their wisdom at the heart of assessing technology. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. And building on the impacts, the direct impacts that we will see from these or could see from these, we are very happy to have Lucas Garibaldi, who is the co-chair of the Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services and co-author of the appeal from scientists and policy experts asking world leaders at COP15 to apply the precautionary principle to biotechnologies that may harm insect pollinators. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here. I come here as an individual scientist and not representing any institution. And I, as an agronomist and also individual scientist and many other scientists in the world, we are signing this appeal that it was already mentioned, that is entitled Dangerous Biotechnologies Put Pollinators at Risk and Threatens Nature Contributions to People. Thank you, Tom, because he already explained what these new genetic biotechnologies are about. We can think about something similar that humanity has been doing during the past decades, which is moving species around the world. So taking one species from Europe and bringing to America, and this created a problem that is called invasive species and is one of the main drivers of biodiversity loss all over the world. And now we want to do something similar or even worse, as Tom explained, but with genes. And the consequences of this can be catastrophic, and we are not able to do proper risk assessment. So this is a huge problem. But it's also an important problem because it's kind of misplaced. Because when you develop a technology like these biotechnologies or GM crops, you develop a technology within a kind of a productive system. And these technologies are developed under the productive system of industrial agriculture. So industrial agriculture is based on large monocultures. So if you are developing a technology that is going to work well only under monocultures, by no way this technology is good for biodiversity. So it's kind of a contradiction that these new biotechnologies are going to help the conservation of biodiversity because they are designed to work within landscapes that have no biodiversity. So I don't think these technologies should be even discussed within the COP15 because they are not at all good for biodiversity. On the other side, we have other ways of producing food that are scientifically proven that they are based on biodiversity and they are highly productive. They provide employment and they provide food sovereignty that are based on agroecological principles that use less pesticides. And these are the kind of things that we should strengthen, how working landscape farming systems can be based on biodiversity. So most of the farming systems nowadays, they destroy biodiversity to produce food, and how we can redesign these farming systems in a way that they are based on biodiversity. And luckily, there are many examples, many positive examples from agroecology all over the world that is feasible and even profitable to produce food and to conserve and restore biodiversity within a farming landscape. So I think that we should focus on living in harmony with biodiversity and redesigning farming systems. And these new biotechnologies, in terms of agriculture, they are not orientated since how they are created to solve any biodiversity problem. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucas. And speaking about real world issues, you know, these are very imminent threats here at COP15 as they are being pushed forward without any seeming concern about the impacts that they will have, social, ecological, socioeconomic. In the United States, there is a real world example of this going on right now with a genetically engineered tree, an American chestnut tree that has been developed specifically for release into wild forests to self-replicate and replace the wild species. This is being pushed forward by the U.S. Department of Agriculture with no long-term understanding of the risks this poses to forests, to biodiversity, to pollinators, to nearby communities. It's very problematic, and it's something that the UN in 2008 warned against when it talked about the need for the precautionary approach with regard to genetically engineered trees. And yet here we are looking down the barrel of this potential gun at our forests and biodiversity, which is this genetically engineered tree in the United States. There's a public comment period going on around it right now, which is why I wanted to bring it up at this press conference. It is something we are determined to ensure does not happen. It would be the first ever time in the world that a genetically engineered plant was released with the intention of spreading itself and replacing a wild species. So that concludes kind of the points of this press conference. We do have 4 whole minutes left. If we have any questions from the audience, or if any of the panelists would like to add anything to what they said earlier. 10 minutes. Yes.
Hi, I have a question. I'm Martin Patnaud from Journalist Neuf. I'm really interested about offsetting, no net loss, and all this kind of stuff. So my question is for the first speaker. So what would be your proposal for the treaty here? Like some net outcome goals, or what would be your proposal for net gain in biodiversity for 2030 or 2050?
The first is no false solutions, no offsets, no carbon credits, no biocredits, and no nature-based solutions. Those are, again, I am saying, those are actually barriers to any movement forward towards real solutions. So if the GBF has to find out the pathway to real solutions, which means that halting and reversing biodiversity loss, it has to the framework cannot afford to follow the pathways to false solutions. The pathways to halt and reverse biodiversity loss has to be different from the pathway towards false solutions. That is all we can say. And of course, rights here are very important. As everybody you can hear talking about, that rights of the IPLCs, a gender-just approach is must, along with pursuing the real solutions pathway.
Thank you.
Hi, Orla Dwyer from Carbon Brief. I had a question for Suparna as well, which is just in terms of the phrasing at the moment around nature-based solutions in the GBF, is there any part of that you see good progress being made on, or do you think that the term should be removed altogether from the framework?
If you ask me, we should remove the term nature-based solutions, because you know in the text it is equated with ecosystems approach. It cannot be done like that.
I know we're running short on time because the previous press conference went a little over, and we need to stop right at 3. So I would invite anybody who wants to have further conversations to do so outside the room. I would be happy also to give you my card with my email address. If you want to follow up with me, I can connect you with speakers. I can also send you the full press release, which has a lot of links to more information about all of the topics that people have been talking about here. So I'm sorry that this was cut short, but there is much more information that I would be happy to share with you on all of these topics.